I'm going to show you a video on the evolution of the butterfly. And I'm sure you're wondering, what in the heck does that have to do with what we're talking about? But the metaphor is, can people, organizations, and society in the aftermath of economic turmoil such as COVID-19, global crisis, and critical setbacks recover? And certainly the caterpillar going to and becoming the butterfly is a metaphor for how can people, organizations, society change and become something new. So we're going to hear Bruce Lipton now with his discussion of that.
The butterfly starts out as a caterpillar. And inside this caterpillar, there are, let's say, 7 billion cells. And every cell, like a miniature human, has a job in that caterpillar. Some cells are doing digestion, some cells are the musculature moving the caterpillar around, some are the nervous system, some are the circulation system. Every cell has a job. All the cells are working full out, and the economy is just bustling and bustling along, and the caterpillar is growing every day and growing and growing and growing. And then one day, the caterpillar stops eating and stops moving. And all of a sudden, the cells inside this caterpillar, which were highly organized into the efficient economic machinery to keep this thing running, the cells start looking around, and sort of like the digestive cells would say, my goodness, there's no work today, there's no food coming in, so there's nothing for me to process. The muscle cells are saying, we're not moving anymore, and we have so many muscle cells, and there's no work for these muscle cells. And at some point, the economy starts to lag so much that cells everywhere start to see that it's not working. The system is falling apart.
The United States is facing a real public health threat from greenhouse gas emissions.
Somehow the rich will eventually get so full that they'll explode. And the candy will rain down on the rest of us.
However, experts say unofficial numbers for the nation's jobless are much higher, as unemployment in minority communities lingers in the double digits to as much as 17% by some predictions.
The American dream fell down, never to be heard from again.
The United Congress is incapable of making legislation on healthcare, banking, trade, or taxes, because if they do it, they will lose their political funding, and they won't do it.
And then all of a sudden, from among the ranks of these cells, a new community of cells starts to manifest. These cells are genetically identical to all the other cells, but these cells see the world in a different way. These cells are called imaginal cells. And these imaginal cells see a different future. And from all the chaos that's around them, the imaginal cells actually start to bring a new idea into the population, how they can escape from the shell and confinement of that caterpillar and create something more sustainable, something more beautiful. And from the information of these imaginal cells, the cells start to gather around and create a new civilization. And the new civilization builds a brand new thing called the butterfly. The butterfly is an evolutionary advance over the caterpillar. And flying out of the broken skin of the dying caterpillar comes a new civilization. This is not the end. This is the beginning of something much greater than humans have ever experienced on this planet before. The creation of a new organism, humanity. Every human is a cell in the body of this wonderful, evolving organism. What we're facing today is a world that is in late-stage caterpillar. So it becomes very important for us to let go of the old and start to gravitate to the new, because we are leaving behind a world that is no longer sustainable and moving into a world in which we can thrive.
Crisis, challenge, and risk benefit organizations, and it is how people grow. People are the tools, and the relationships built on trust, transparency, are the means for correction and resolution. These issues are the reasons that serve to rebirth relationships of trust, transparency between coworkers, employees, management, and clients. People are the imaginal cells, just like the caterpillar going to the cocoon to become the butterfly. Something magical happens in there with that cocoon, what are called imaginal cells, that create this vision and reality called the butterfly. And people are capable of rising to the challenge, taking the risk to make organizations and themselves better and help them grow. We can never really be prepared for that which is wholly new. We have to adjust ourselves. We have to undergo a test. We have to prove ourselves. What do we need? We need self-confidence to face the drastic changes without inner trembling, or, if you will, spilling the water. Section 3. When stress becomes distress, where is it most likely to manifest in the workplace? We're going to see a video now by Chris White, which is going to deal with what is the one thing you are willing to commit to do in order to unblock communication in your work area.
Do you remember when 20,000 people walked out of Google in protest of unfair and unequal treatment of women at the company? On a single day? The protest was dramatic. It was headline-grabbing. It sent a clear signal. We will no longer check our identities and our values at the workplace door. It was also the exception rather than the rule. Because while brave, certainly brave, the Google employees felt safe enough to organize collectively without fear of reprisals. They felt secure enough that even if they lost their jobs, they'd still probably be highly employable somewhere else. Not everyone has that luxury. Not everyone feels that way about speaking up at work. Social movement scholars would call the Google walkouts a mobilizing structure. Others mobilize in different ways, depending on their context and their cause. In fact, walkouts do happen pretty much every day in the workplace. They're just not normally done with our feet. Instead, they're checkouts. There are invisible walkouts that happen with our hearts and with our hands and with our voices. And let's be honest, amongst the TED group here, pretty much all of us have checked out at some point in our careers, haven't we? When we feel psychologically unsafe or unvalued, we protest quietly, sometimes even silently or subconsciously. Maybe we stop trying as hard at work. Or maybe we act in ways that subtly undermine leadership or act against the organization's objectives just a little bit. In corporate speak, we become disengaged or actively disengaged. Like 70% of the workforce, at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars a year to the global economy. So, if you're an executive and you want to avoid walkouts or checkouts before they become issues at your organization, there are 3 things that you can do. First, unblock communication. Walkouts and checkouts happen when we feel that we're not being heard, we're not being respected or considered in the workplace. And just about all of us have experienced having our ideas shot down or ignored in the workplace. When it happens, we tend to experience it as an identity threat. Some of us respond to that by closing down, shutting off. When we feel that we don't belong or that we're unimportant, our reaction is to stop caring as much about our work and caring as much about the people around us. So I remember feeling heartbroken when I was a new manager. I just asked a colleague of mine with decades of work experience for a recommendation on a problem that she'd brought to me. We stood in agonizing silence while she searched for an answer, any answer. After a long pause, she looked up and said, "I have never been asked what I think at work before." Now that is tragic, and it's all too common. And to avoid this pitfall, we need to continually invite people to speak up at work, because making these invitations just a routine part of how we engage with each other in the workplace actually lays really important groundwork that is needed for those times when people have to speak up and have to be heard on issues that are hard for management to hear. Backed into a corner by the scale and the intensity of the protests, Google CEO Sundar Pichai had a choice. He could choose to respond in a way that would close the door to people acting in line with their values, or he could choose to open it wider. Pichai's public response to the protests was not defensive. Instead, he sent an email out to the whole company. He said, "I understand the anger and disappointment that many of you feel. I feel it too. And I'm fully committed to making progress on an issue that has persisted for far too long in our society. And yes, here at Google too." He informed managers of the planned activities. He reassured protesters that they would have the support that they needed. But checkouts, because they're invisible, are even harder to notice and address than a 20,000 person walkout. Instead, managers have to proactively unblock the organization. They need to ask questions, they need to invite input, they need to foster creative conflict. But especially in that fragile moment where people have the courage to challenge us, we too need to embrace them for it. But then we need to become responsive, because we know, don't we, that it's not enough just to hear people out. Words without action breed cynicism. They lay the seeds for future walkouts and checkouts. The Google walkouts were not a first step. They were a last resort. The Google employees had already spoken to managers and HR and ombuds people. This was an escalation because they felt their issues were not being addressed, they're not being taken seriously. And while Pichai's response was a good one, it was supportive, Some people continue protesting to this day at Google because they do not feel that sufficient action has followed the supportive words. Now, when managers and employee activists are on the same page, then action is a natural next step. But here's the thing, we're not always going to agree, are we? Sometimes employee activists will raise issues that managers just don't agree with. And in that fragile moment, we will determine what kind of culture we will have. Will we engage in dialogue and debate? Can we stay unified even in dissent? Or will we choose to skate over our differences, allow our relationships to become inauthentic, and our identities to become diluted? What will it be? Well, at a minimum, we can try to have dialogue. We can try to resolve our differences and find common ground that, even if it's not ideal for any one party, might be acceptable for all. And sometimes, though, that is just too hard. The common ground can't be found. And in that difficult place, we have three choices. First, if we feel we can't live with the resolution, then we can choose to leave the company. We can find employers whose values more closely align with our own. Or, second, we can choose to stay with the company. We can compartmentalize, keep doing a good job, and hope for an issue, look for a time to address the issue again in the future. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos is an advocate of a third path. He says, let's disagree and commit. Address the issue head on, and he'll ask his team, look, I know we don't agree here, but will you gamble with me on it? And if your reservoir of trust in your relationship is deep enough, you can continue to move forward on the work and agree to keep working on the issue as you go. Any one of those options is better than the alternative of checking out, which is a surefire path to organizational demise and professional misery. So finally, aim higher. Doesn't it seem like a low bar just to avoid checkouts and walkouts? Shouldn't we strive for more? We need to invite people to bring their whole selves to work, because when everyone can bring their life experiences, we just have so much more to offer. We are more than the sum of our resumes. This is Joan Bohan. Joan is a finance director at Disney Europe. She's also a mother. And her son, Roman, has dyslexia. Did you know that 1 in 10 people live with dyslexia? That's a huge population serve, a huge potential market for a company like Disney. So when Disney announced an internal contest for new and impactful business ideas, Joan just couldn't resist applying. She'd heard about modifications that made it easier for dyslexics to read, different, larger fonts, wider spaces between letters, rulering between lines, but these weren't widely available. Could Disney help with that? Because Disney invited Joan to bring her whole self to work and all of her unique strengths, values, passions, experiences, they can now better serve millions of people with dyslexia. So all this sounds good. Unblock communication, become responsive, aim higher. Where do we begin? Well, I'd like to end by offering you a short test. I'd like you on Monday morning to go back into work, and I'd like you to walk around and, after some pleasant chit-chat, talk to 10 different people and ask them this question. Hi, what don't we talk about around here that we really should be talking about? You'll probably get one of those awkward silences, and that's okay. If they do pause, then say, come to me later, tell me what you find. If no one has anything, then your organization is probably blocked. But that's okay. By asking the question, you have signaled openness. Keep going. Keep asking the questions. Ari Weinzweig, CEO of Zingerman's, likes to say, success doesn't mean we have no problems, it means we have better problems. And my closing wish for you is that you earn better problems. by unblocking communication, by becoming responsive, over time, more and more people will open up and start sharing more of themselves, their ideas, their unique offerings. And over time, you will have a new, better problem. Harnessing that energy and aiming higher. Thank you.
So we all face dilemmas, and we all have prejudice. And those can be both conscious and unconscious. So what is a dilemma? Situations where a difficult choice has to be made between two or more alternatives. And it's especially stressful when the choices are both undesirable. So in thinking about this, it made me reflect on the movie Sophie's Choice. Because in that movie, Meryl Streep, the actress, had to choose between one of her two children that would die and one that would live. And the movie was heart-wrenching as she dealt with that. That was her dilemma, and both answers were undesirable. So, what is leadership's dilemma? How do you adapt to the realities of this new world? Leaders are confronted with serious problems. In a quickly transforming landscape, they must be able to move their organizations from an initial idea to full-scale implementation. So obviously during COVID-19, this became a whole new challenge, a whole new world that had to be acted on immediately. And with little to no time for employees to adjust to the new way of doing things. The focus is on making change happen. The sooner, the better. Now, the employee's dilemma is employees must contend with a pervasive sense of economic uncertainty. They are uneasy about their financial future and wonder how long the tumultuous economic environment will last. What will happen next? Will I make it? The focus is on surviving. Just a quick story. Our son is a nurse practitioner, but when COVID-19 hit, his clinic literally closed down and the doctors went to telemedicine. Our son was without a job and he signed on as a ICU nurse in a COVID ICU at a tertiary care hospital. And he did that for the next 11 months. And that gave him the economic and financial future he needed, but it was still a very difficult adjustment for he and his family. What is prejudice? A preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience. If people are left to their own instincts and their own authority, they'll somehow act in a way that runs counter to society and counter to the organization. We fear that people do not have the wish or the ability to act responsibly. External authority must be constantly reinforced in order to keep us focused on common goals for the common purpose. The employee's prejudice. Employees have an instinctive fear of separation and anxiety of being left out or left behind. We're all members of a tribe or a family, and we want to be part of that family, certainly at work too. This fear causes people to say and do things that compromises what they believe, attempting to win approval of others. Employees' prejudice. At the core is the fear of taking risks, an inner conflict of wanting to achieve more but afraid of losing what one already has. At the organizational level, it becomes a collective deception leading to self-destructive decisions. Fear in the workplace. Leadership is afraid that employees cannot be trusted to fulfill the organization's expectations without micromanaging. Micromanaging is an organizational term for controlling every part of a program or process. Control is a natural expression of distress. Fear in the workplace. Employees are afraid they may not be good enough, intelligent enough, or skilled enough to be noticed. People who feel unrecognized or unconsidered will use aggression, charm, procrastination, or moodiness to get what they feel they need. Many employees will manifest a variety of drama during these times. These are control mechanisms, a natural expression of distress. The unspoken notion is fear is good. A certain level of fear in the workplace is beneficial. But the myth of fear externally exposed. It has a short-term impact. It can jumpstart an organization. It can produce a productivity boost. It combats aggression, charm, procrastination, and moodiness. But long-term impact undermines trust. Short-term benefits are unsustainable, arouses overreactions, inhibits intentionality. When fear is internally acknowledged, the discomfort or frustration it produces can serve to direct the individual to self-improve. So you've got to realize I'm in a fear modality, and I've got to deal with that directly so I can improve and not deny it. So fear in the workplace. Being a team player becomes code not for criticizing the boss, supporting the party line, or just go along to get along. Emphasizing efficiency over relationship leads to dead silence, an unwillingness to talk openly about concerns or issues. The exercise of authority in the absence of relationship can be seen as threatening. Why do people sit through a meeting and not say what is really on their mind? Undiscussable, that thing that needs to be said but nobody's saying it. A problem issue not discussed with those who are essential to its resolution. A barrier that many feel crossing it will make life at work more threatening and too risky. 4 reasons that people give for sitting through a meeting and not saying what is really on their mind. 1, fear of repercussions. 2, a belief that speaking up would do no good. 3, trying to avoid conflict. And 4, a reluctance to be seen as causing trouble. I have to tell you a story about a classmate of mine during my master's program. And God bless Laura, she would always ask the question that we were all thinking about, but everybody was afraid to say. So we're in this one class, and it's the very first day of this particular class. And our instructor says, I want you to know that I don't give A's or B's likely, and most everybody's going to get C's. Those were the first words out of her mouth. And Laura raises her hand and says, I have a question. I thought we were here to learn, and the focus wasn't on grades. So can you help explain that to me? And that would be Laura. She would ask those kind of questions when everyone else was scared and couldn't do it. So the spiral of mistrust. Well, you have persons A and B. And A has negative assumptions about B. So person A self-protects. Person A is seen as aggressive and avoidant. Then B makes negative assumptions about A. B self-protects. B is seen as aggressive and avoidant. And now you have negative assumptions are reinforced for both A about B and B about A. So the primary issues that keep the spiraling going. One is high anxiety and fears. 2, times of crisis. 3, poor market conditions. 4, upper management pressures. 5, cultural interests. 6, workforce pressures. 7, heightened ambiguity. 8, massive changes of any kind. What can we expect when the spiral is left unattended? Information gets distorted, people reacting to protect themselves. Accuracy, comprehensiveness, and respect for timelessness drops. People are less intentional and less aware. The influence of those in charge is held suspect and not trusted. People are resistant and deflect perceived threats. Collaboration and joint problem solving is lost. People begin to dissociate from the program or the organization. So what can we expect when the spiral is left unattended? Spirals feed upon themselves and spawn other spirals. A general climate of constraint becomes normalized. It sets up forces and organizational structures that sustain the fear defense. It elevates dependent, passive, and conforming people into positions of visibility and influence. So just imagine throwing a pebble in a quiet lake and watching the ripple effect. So it starts out just with one ripple, just maybe 2 people not getting along. And then it spreads throughout the team with one ripple after another. So the Peter Principle. A person who is competent at their job earns a promotion to a new position, one which requires a different set of skills. If that person lacks or does not acquire the skills required for the new role, they will be incompetent at the new level and will not be promoted again. If the person is competent, they will be promoted again and will continue to be promoted until reaching a level at which they are incompetent. Being incompetent and not qualifying for another promotion, they remain at this level known as the final placement or Peter's plateau. So, we follow the Peter principle with promotions. If Peter likes you, you get promoted. But let me give you a real-world example in medicine. You may have a surgeon that's a really great surgeon, and then they become chief of staff or chief of the surgery committee. And from there, they get promoted to medical director. And from there, they get promoted to an administrative position with lots of responsibilities. And the problem is they have not been trained in administration or business. And now you have the Peter principle. So what have we learned so far? Leadership and employees often find that they do not trust one another. When it comes to making difficult choices, leadership and employees differ on the basis from which they make those choices. The spiral of mistrust exists, it is real, and it must be deflated, or organizations run the risk of it spinning beyond control and spawning additional spirals. Exercising of authority in the absence of relationship will increase tension. Remember, it's about relationships, relationships, relationships. Emphasizing efficiency over relationship leads to dead silence, the greatest threat to any organization. So let's check in with you. Reflect and write down one issue you have hesitated to talk about at work in the last 3 to 5 years of your job experience. Write 1 to 3 reasons that caused you to hesitate and not speak up. Write a short narrative that briefly describes the situation and 2 ways that it impacted you. What is the one thing you would do differently today? So why don't you take the next minute and just write down the first things that come to your mind, or later come back to this. But this is really important. And we all need to have a Laura, one of my classmates, who always asks the question that no one else wants to ask. So now section 4, what is compassion fatigue? What are the essentials for overcoming it? And how can we begin to move forward? So now we're going to watch Juliet Watt talk about compassion fatigue, what it is, and do you have it?
Are you feeling overwhelmed? Are you exhausted? Depressed? Are you anxious for all the wrong reasons? Do you suddenly burst into tears for absolutely no reason? Do I sound like a TV commercial for an antidepressant? Well, I'm not. This is what happens when giving is no longer living. I mean, have you been asking yourself, what is the matter with me? Why do I feel so awful? I have a great life. I have a fabulous job. I'm very, very, very busy. I have tons of friends. My family is awesome. Why do I keep complaining? Well, I want you to complain louder. All these feelings are totally okay. And I can promise you, you are not alone. In fact, if you are taking care of someone, it's actually quite normal. These feelings are the cost of caring for others, the cost of losing yourself in who you're being for everyone else. And these feelings have a name: compassion fatigue. Yes, it's very real, and no, it isn't when you're tired of being nice. Compassion fatigue is a dark, insidious syndrome that creeps up on you. You don't know what it is, you don't know you have it, you just know something is very wrong, and you don't feel like you anymore. Compassion fatigue was discovered in 1992 by Dr. Charles Figley, professor in disaster mental health of Tulane University. Now, Dr. Figley defines compassion fatigue as the emotional and physical burden created by caring for others in distress. It can also be known as secondary vicarious stress disorder, which is comparable to PTSD. But if you have compassion fatigue, you don't have PTSD, but you do start to take on some of the symptoms as if they were your own. Now, back then, Dr. Figley was primarily referring to ER nurses, firefighters, EMS workers, pretty much everyone in the professional business of caring. So as I was digging deeper into my research, I started to realize that a lot of these symptoms was really starting to feel uncomfortably familiar. Symptom number one, irritated and frustrated most of the time. Check. Symptom number two, feeling absolutely worthless and terribly sad. Check. Symptom number three, isolating yourself and disconnecting from everyone around you, including your own family. Nothing makes sense anymore. Double check. But hang on. This didn't make sense. I'm not an ER nurse. I'm not a firefighter. I don't look after somebody with PTSD, and I don't deal with trauma every day. So remember Dr. Figley, who discovered compassion fatigue? Well, I called him. And that's when the light bulb went off. We are all potentially vulnerable to compassion fatigue. You don't have to be in the professional business of caring. You just have to be caring. Did you know that 1/3 of Americans are currently providing long-term care to a loved one in their home? That's 108 million people potentially suffering from compassion fatigue in silence. So let me ask you, are you looking after an elderly parent, spouse, loved one in your home, and it's taken over your life? Their needs come first. Their survival is more important than yours. You can't afford to put them in a nursing home, and you can't afford in-home care. You're the one administering medical attention without any medical training whatsoever. You're the one cooking, cleaning, carrying, and potentially, possibly, dealing with a very serious mental illness like Alzheimer's. You're the one, because their life is in your hands. Maybe you're a working parent, and you work long hours, and you come home and you are exhausted. Now you have to be a parent. You have to cook dinner, do the laundry. Oh, and let's not forget baseball practice, basketball practice, soccer practice, band practice, and just the general business of keeping the kids alive. Right? You're the one, because their life is in your hands. My own compassion fatigue credentials started when I was 14. My father died when I was 10. I was an only child, and for the next 50 years, I was emotionally shackled to my mother, a woman in perfect health, but her demands were my orders. I left school at 15, we'd run out of money. We got evicted, I found us somewhere to live. I forged my birth certificate to go and work at the Playboy Club. Oh yeah, I was illegal, but mother didn't notice or care. It was my duty to save us. You see, I didn't know. I was slowly suffocating under this crushing burden of keeping us alive. Yes, her survival was more important than mine, but I did that. I chose that because I was so afraid of her. Why? Because she could emotionally hurt me, wound me. Frequently, she would look me straight in the eye, and she would say, you know, everything and everyone I have ever loved is dead. Clearly, I was her lifeline, not her loved one. The poet Maya Angelou says, never make someone a priority when all you are to them is an option. Eventually, I ran away here to the US. I put 5,000 miles between us. Nevertheless, for the 6 years before she died, every Sunday, 2 p.m. sharp, she would call, and no matter where I was in the country, I would do her grocery shopping online to a store 2 blocks from where she lived in London. 4 years ago, I got the email. Dear Mrs. Watt, this is Mr. Ernest Cook from the Camden Council Mortuary in London. We have your mother in the fridge. What would you like us to do? Yeah, I laughed too. It was funny. It was funny. And I felt nothing. And I didn't care. Was I a bad person? No. I was done. My compassion cup was empty, and I was well into burnout, which, at this point, most people get prescribed antidepressants, which makes just everything worse. Because here's the deceitful twist of this syndrome. You think you have depression, but you have compassion fatigue. Now, does any of this sound familiar? For those of you out there nodding your heads in silence, let me just offer you this question. And this is a question I would like you to consider. Ask yourself, what is the most important thing in your life? You're going to say your children, your family, maybe your career so you can provide for your family, and all of that is the wrong answer. What if I told you the right answer was, I am the most important thing in my life, me. Eeks. Ha! Can you just imagine saying that? The judgment, the astonishment, the amazement of people at your selfishness. Oh gosh, people might not like you anymore. But here's why it's critical. If you can't take care of your own happiness first, how on earth can you take care of anyone else's? If you can't love yourself first, how can you give love to anyone or anything? If you can't live in gratitude and joy, how can you bring fulfillment and joy to anyone else? If I could have seen back then, if I could have seen what I was doing to myself, if I could have seen my mother for who she was, if I could have seen that I was the option, not the priority, I would have said, stop, be brave, Put yourself first. Take care of this person first. I would have said, go and live that dream. No one's going to do it for you, and quite frankly, no one will really care if you don't. I would have said, learn to say no, because helping shouldn't hurt. So now I would like to invite you to just take a moment and refill your cup. Maybe start with something small, a moment of peace. This is mine. He soothes my soul. He brings me back to who I am. What's yours? And I would like to leave you with this. Compassion fatigue is so very, very real, but it is not hopeless. And most of all, you are not alone. Thank you.
I think the highlight of what Juliet is saying is when empathy or compassion for others really becomes the negative cost of caring. It's when giving so much is no longer living. So the three factors for compassion fatigue is, number one, primary toxic stress trauma. Well, I've already discussed that in the sense of we talked about adverse childhood experiences. And that is something, your primary toxic stress is very personal. You have experienced it personally. Secondary toxic stress trauma would be something that you've witnessed or you've heard or seen, but it's not directly you. And for example, primary toxic stress might be your father was an alcoholic and he'd come home every night and beat mom. And if he could find you, he'd beat you. So secondary toxic stress would be you're talking to a patient who, this is a woman who's married to an alcoholic, and she recounts her story, which is very similar to yours, and her story elicits your story. And then finally, the gas gauge is on, the red light's on, the gas is empty, and you've reached burnout. So the physical symptoms of compassion fatigue are increasingly absent from work, increase in physical illness, feeling fatigued more often, more anxious, keyed up, or nervous, less physical exercise or movement than usual. Normal sleep routines are disrupted and difficult. Lost enjoyment in intimate and sexual activities. The psychological symptoms of compassion fatigue are you and or others have noticed you are more cynical and pessimistic. You and or others have noticed you are avoiding feelings by numbing or shutting down. You are having work-related nightmares or bad dreams. You and or others have noticed you have lost interest and enjoyment in activities. You and or others have noticed you have difficulty in making decisions or making poor decisions. you and or others have noticed you have lost your self-esteem. The emotional symptoms of compassion fatigue. You have been more angry and irritable than normal. You have directed or feel anger toward your supervisors or co-workers. You have been feeling flat, depressed, or hopeless. You have moments of dread when thinking about going to work. You are having trouble finding hope. You are less connected to your spiritual and or religious beliefs. You are feeling overwhelmed more than 3 times in the past week. Let me go back to that, Zack.
Sure.
You may think you've been functioning well at work, or at least adequately, but something happens when you come home and talk to your spouse or significant other, and they live with you and they see so often what is going on and will bring that to your attention. And that is a gift, to get that feedback from them. The spiritual symptoms of compassion fatigue. You have been avoiding spending time with your friends and family. You fear for the safety of yourself and or your loved ones. You have engaged less rather than more in activities that used to bring you pleasure. You have had less time for yourself. You find it difficult to trust others. You are having feelings of despair and hopelessness. And then occupational symptoms of compassion fatigue. You've been unable to get work. You have been unable to work through specific issues in your thoughts. You are having unwanted memories pop up in your head of past work-related events. Your productivity has fallen off. You have or are feeling like quitting your job more than once recently. You find paperwork and menial tasks are getting in the way of you enjoying your work. I know one of the things that was really hard for me was you would see patients till 5 or later, but then you had all those messages you had to return. You had your electronic medical records you might have to complete that kept you in the office another hour or 2. Very difficult. And then maybe you had a long commute home. So what is burnout? Burnout is a borrowed term from the American industrial age, a time when factory operators showed little regard for the needs of their human resources. Burnout is a consequence of environments that are chaotic, threatening, abusive, and dehumanizing. Burnout occurs when systems, people steal our focus, our energy, or our opportunity to choose. Burnout is often caused when we try controlling people and things that we cannot possibly control. Burnout causes production and service cycles to be wasted. Burnout increases patterns that lead to distress. So what is burn-in? It's the antidote to burnout. Burn-in is a term used in electronics and refers to the process by which components of a system are exercised prior to being placed in service. Burn-in is the means for testing components to evaluate their readiness. These tests are conducted under supervised conditions so as to fully understand the component's capacity or ability to perform. As the burn-in period is made sufficiently long, then the system can be trusted and will most likely perform successfully in real-life conditions. Issues detected during the burn-in period can be dealt with before putting at risk the whole system. Components that come to thrive during the burn-in period means they have found their groove. Burn-in comes from a practice that works from generous and persistent approaches from predictable environments. Burn-in makes it possible for innovative solutions and sustainable contributions. My analogy for us in medicine is that ACLS, acute cardiac life support, is our chance to burn in with how to do a cardiac resuscitation. And it gives us a chance to make mistakes, to learn, and become more adept at this complex problem, so that you're not at the side of the bed trying to do a resuscitation and you haven't been there before. So burn in with ACLS is a critical factor in our training and our continued training.